Hey, morning, guys. So we were looking at frequency tables yesterday. So now we're going to move on to group frequency tables. So as you can kind of see from there. In regards to group frequency tables, the reasons why you might use group frequency instead of just frequency table by itself is if it's just a frequency table. So that might be something like how many siblings do you have? There won't be that big a range. You might have one, you might have two, you might have three, you might have four, and then you would just find one section that just says greater than or something. And so you can be very specific. But when it comes to group frequency, say if the whole school ran a race for 100 meters, do I want to plot each and every single time, or do I just want to go, well, I'm going to make sure I get the times between, I don't know, 0 and 10, and then I'll get the times between like 10 and 20, and then I'll get the times for like 20 and 30, whichever kind of race you're doing. But then you can just kind of group it up. I don't have to say, oh, this person ran 100 meters in 9.6 seconds, yay. And then for someone else, say, oh, they ran the same race in 9.8 seconds. Just say they're both within 10 seconds and it's much easier. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of a group frequency table. It's logical when you think about it, but obviously when you just look at a bunch of tables like this, it's just like, Okay, so we are just going to look at the averages for this. It's very similar to what we've done. You just might notice there's just an extra word. That's all. Okay, so for this one, you might have an estimated range, potentially. I've only ever heard anyone do a range about this once, and when they did the range, they went, the possible range could be 160, take away 100. But most of the time when you have group frequency tables, you don't talk about the range. You only talk about the averages. Okay, so for this one, the first average I would usually think about, which is the easiest, is the mode. But in a group frequency table, the mode is actually called the modal class, because the mode is about one specific piece of data, but you're not talking about one specific piece of data, you're talking about a whole group, okay? And each of these groups are called classes, okay? So we are talking about the modal class. So we're saying which of these classes contains the mode. That's all you're saying. Like, a lot of people look at this and seem to be really confused. It is just the mode, but you're talking about a class instead of a specific piece of data. So when we're looking at the mode, the highest frequency, so you should remember this from yesterday, the highest frequency is the class that is 110 to 120. That would then be my modal class. Oops. That looks dodgy. There you go. Okay, that would be my modal class. Okay, and then we need to look at the median. Okay, so when you talk about the median, you will notice on the question it does say the class containing the median. Okay, so you're doing exactly the same thing. All I have to do is just make sure I total up the frequency and then get a running total. I'm just going to draw up the table on here so I don't waste time. Okay, so I've drawn up part of the table, and as the median, you should know from the total. So obviously we've got sigma f. Sigma is that's the uppercase sigma in the Greek alphabet. Yeah. Okay, it just means sum. It just means you're adding up everything. So I'm saying the sum of the frequency, so the total frequency is 46. So as you learned from last lesson, so I've got to do the sum of the frequency, which is 46. 46 plus 1 is 47, and then just divide by 2 to find that halfway point. The halfway point is 23.5. Okay, so now I'm going to do my cumulative frequency, running total, whichever way you want to talk about it, down the side here. So I'm going to say, who got 110 or less? 5 people. Who got 120 or less? 20 people. Who got 130 or less? 27. Quite a few people would stop at this point because I only want to reach 23.5. And once you stop at that point, then you automatically know that this is the class that contains the median, okay? Other people will keep going until they get to the end just because they like checking. So they might go, 31, 34, 46. And that way they're always just double checking that everything adds up correctly. But even if you just get to 27, you can just stop at that point because you found out the class that contains the median. Okay? Okay, so last but not least, we need to talk about the mean. Okay, so the mean, you should recall how to do it from yesterday's lesson. If you don't, you definitely need to check out those notes that I told you to take. Okay, so we do know from the mean that we were multiplying whatever the score was by the frequency, but you can't multiply it by the score here because the score is a whole class of data and you can't just pick and choose. Okay, so the way that this is combated, you will also know it's called the estimate of the mean because you don't know the exact values. So if you see estimate of the mean, that just means do the mean. Okay, so, but because we don't have a fixed value here, the first thing I need to do is find a value that I'm just going to estimate. Okay, so the value is halfway in between. So if you're not sure how to do halfway in between, you add whatever these two values are, the start and the end, and then you add them together and divide it by 2. And so for the first one, you would get 105, and then you can just continue all the way down. The only reason why I'm telling you this is because whereas these ones are very easy to find the halfway point, sometimes it's not, okay? So you need to be aware of the middle. If you cannot find the halfway point, always take the mean of the higher and the lower value within the class. Okay, so for this one, I need to find all those midpoints. So let's call it midpoint. Okay, so my midpoint here is 105, and then it's 115, 125, 135, 145, and 155. Okay, now do I have a fixed value? Well, yes, okay, I could say that, let's say there's 5 people that scored within this class, so they got between 100 and 110. I don't know what the exact scores were. They might all be 100, they might all be 110. But because I don't know, I'm just going to choose a halfway figure. So I'm going to say, I guess that it's 105. It's about halfway. So I've got my estimate of what it would be, and then I just have to tally up what the estimate overall for all 5 of those students is, which is 525. So you're doing exactly the same as you did yesterday, where you essentially just multiply each of them. Okay, so for the next one, you are doing 15 times 115, which is 1725. Okay, and then it is 7 times 125, which is 875. You've then got 4 times 135, which is 540. You've got 3 times 145, which is 435. And you have 12 times 155, which is 1860. Okay, so at this point, we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did last time, which is we are going to add this up. So obviously this is frequency times the midpoint. Okay, so some people call it like FM because it's the frequency times the midpoint, which is exactly what it is, right? So let's add all of those up. 875. Okay, so altogether, this is 5960, and this would be the sum of frequency times the midpoint, which is that one there. Okay, so in order to find the actual mean, so this estimate of the mean would be the total estimated score, which is your sum of FM, divided by the total number of students, which is your sum of F. Okay, so that's 5960 divided by 46, which is 129.565 ... Okay, I'm just going to do it to the nearest whole number. So I'm going to say whole number. Okay, they don't actually give me a limit of what it should or shouldn't be. I'm just going to choose the nearest whole number because if it's a score, you don't really get half points. Okay, so 130 would be the estimate of the mean. That should cover the estimate of the mean, the modal class, and the class containing the median. So I have got a basic sheet. I've also got an extension sheet for those people that want to try that. As per usual, and as I asked yesterday, I do need to see the notes that you've made for this, but I also need to see the questions with full working out. So they've got empty columns on here, so if you are printing it out, you can just use the empty columns. Otherwise, if you are drawing it, I still expect you to draw it. And I would say, because it's quite an important thing to know, and averages, you don't keep going over averages all the time. So you need to make sure your notes are completely spot on now. Okay, so make sure you make adequate notes, make sure they're nice and neat, make sure you store them away, and then obviously do the practice. And I just want to see photos of all that. Okay, take care, guys. Enjoy the rest of the day. May you get some vitamin D. I think the weather forecast said it was going to be sunny tomorrow. Toodles.